National Civil Rights Center and Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina is now open.
Hundreds of people gathered at a former Woolworth department store to pay tribute to what happened here 50 years ago.
I will not rest.
Inspired by civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., 4 black college students walked into a Woolworth store in Greensboro, North Carolina on February 1st, 1960. They sat down at the whites-only lunch counter, but were denied service because of their skin color.
In our hearts, we all thought that racial segregation was an evil.
Joseph McNeil was just 17 years old when he and his friends refused to leave the segregated counter. At the time, they could have been arrested for breaking so-called Jim Crow laws that were enacted to keep blacks and whites separated at public places such as theaters, hotels, and restaurants.
We had to be arrested for a week or 1 day or 2 months or 3 months. We felt that what we were trying to do was worth it, to do that, to make that statement and to defy racial segregation.
Franklin McCain says he was driven to participate in the sit-ins because of the discrimination that surrounded him.
I was quite ready to do something, to seek relief, to seek a spot of dignity, humanity, and my manhood. Unfortunately, I met 3 other guys who felt the same way.
Jabril Kazan from Greensboro remembers what the white waitress told them.
"What do you boys want?" And we said, "We'd like to be served, please," very politely. And she said, "You boys know we don't serve colored people here. There's a lunch counter for you over there. The stand-up counter." And we said, "Thank you, ma'am. We'd rather sit here."
Days later, and tired of the discriminatory practices, more blacks, even some white people, got involved in the sit-in movement. Joseph McNeil says at one point, more than 500 students jammed the lunch counters at Woolworth and other stores with segregated lunch counters.
So our part was starting this thing and getting it done, but not just that, but keeping up the commitment. Keep coming back day after day as we'd promised the stores that we would do if they didn't open the counters to everybody.
Longtime civil rights activist Julian Bond says the Greensboro sit-ins changed the course of the civil rights movement during the 1960s.
And it injected a degree of activism in the civil rights movement, which until then had been largely confined to activism in the courts. All of a sudden, activism in the streets became part of the arena, part of the weaponry that the movement used, and that just changed everything.
In July 1960, and after $200,000 in lost business, Woolworth agreed to integrate its store, allowing blacks to be served at the lunch counter. Historian Lonnie Bunch says the Greensboro campaign was not the first, but it did capture national media attention and spark hundreds of similar nonviolent protests across the country.
So celebrating the Greensboro sit-in really tells us that we're celebrating the sit-ins that occurred in other parts of the South, in other cities throughout the North.
Jabril Kazan says he's honored to have a place in history, but gives credit to the wisdom of his ancestors.
And we just happened to be blessed to be the 4 that did this, and it caught fire throughout the country. But all things are possible if we only believe. That's what I was taught.
On the 50th anniversary of the Greensboro sit-ins, a new chapter in the history of the civil rights movement has begun with a new International Civil Rights Museum. Community leaders want it to be a lasting tribute to the sacrifices so many African Americans made for equality and social justice. Chris Simkins, VOA News, Greensboro, North Carolina.